And I'm Ben Swan filling in for Steve Malzberg today. Are police departments across the country becoming militarized? The answer obviously is yes. But the question that so many people across the country are now beginning to ask is it the right move for law enforcement to be militarized? We're joined now by Jonathan Gilliam. He is a former FBI special agent, federal air marshal, and police officer, who, by the way, also is a Navy SEAL. It's good to have you with us.
I get bored easy.
It sounds like it. Yeah, I'm really glad you're here because there's so much that needs to be discussed about this particular issue. As I've been telling different guests today, I've actually been studying this issue for over a year and reporting on it for quite some time. Most media has ignored it. And so there is a certain shock value, I think, for the national media when they say, oh, where did all this military gear come from? What's happening? Oh, if you didn't realize that that was taking place, I can understand the surprise. They, again, not to give them a pass, they should have known it was happening.
Right.
Militarization really comes down to a lot of military equipment that was used in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's being granted by the Department of Defense through grant programs to local law enforcement, correct?
Right.
Is it a problem? Is it a negative?
Well, let's look at the positives first,
Okay.
all right? Because there's always positives and negatives
Sure.
to everything. The positives are that when something goes down big, like let's say a Mumbai-style attack, or who knows, you have a crazy shooter who's just out to kill as many people as they can, you do have the equipment to counter that attack. So first and foremost, because the equipment, it's like saying that guns kill people. Well, the truth is people kill people. So the equipment itself is not a bad thing. It's good to have it, and because you can't go back and get it quickly if you need it. Those are the positives. Also, having certain groups trained to an elite level, there's nothing wrong with that. What I think the negatives are is that you give all the training, all the gear, to one specific group, and you forget about the rest of law enforcement. So what we think of as militarization, what we're really seeing is a whole lot of gear and little bit, sometimes moderate training to a specific group who they are militarized. The rest of law enforcement is not.
So wait, what is that small group? You're talking about SWAT?
SWAT teams.
Okay.
SWAT teams, ESU, emergency response units. They call them different things in different places. And look, I'm a big supporter of SWAT, but I think that the mistakes are being, the big mistakes that are being made are in places like Little Rock, Arkansas, where I'm originally from, where their SWAT has to do all warrants, all drug arrests, anything that they even think might have any type of danger, which, I mean, to be honest with you, everything you do in law enforcement is dangerous. They take that away from the street cops or even the specialty units, and they give it to SWAT. So what happens is you're teaching learned helplessness to the patrolmen, to the narcotics detectives, to the vice detectives. You're eliminating their ability to think outside the box and to go in and actually do their job. So, and what happens when you do that? Officers start thinking, I might get in trouble if I do that. That's not my job. And you're basically teaching them to just be quiet and go away, basically.
Now, an interesting idea here on the issue of SWAT. Let's stay on there for a minute, because the ACLU has been trying to get information for almost a year themselves about this military gear. Who has it? Where it's being sent? Which departments have it? How it's being used? And one of the things that they have found is that SWAT teams are claiming that they don't have to respond to FOIA requests because they are a private corporation separate from police departments. Have you heard of this?
No, I've not heard of it, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, look, trying to categorize every SWAT member and every SWAT team as this, football Rambo type group on the police department, that's not a realization. I mean, it's not a real analysis. But the reality is some SWAT members are like that. You have a lot of people who are really into gear and getting a lot of gear, and when that stuff is offered, they take it. But when it comes down to the fact of how they respond to the press, you do have a group of people that are trained and that typically are very type A personalities, and they make up their own rules a lot of the times when it comes to how they react to the press.
Yeah, they do. And part of course, the problem with that is that you should be responsive to the people who, number one, pay your salaries, and number two, are actually paying for all this gear and equipment as well.
Right.
Ferguson, there are so many problems with what took place there, from the way police responded to the way the governor of the state responded, the bringing out the military gear. I mean, they turned it into a scene that looked like Cairo instead of Missouri. Your stance on that, did police misstep? Where were the missteps? Where should they have de-escalated things rather than escalated them?
So exactly what we're talking about here is, whether or not this kid in Missouri was responsible for his own death is still being worked out. What is clear and evident is that, and we don't have to look any further than the response is that this police department did not affect, nor did the state of Missouri effectively think out how they would respond in a situation like this. And it's not unheard of I mean, these types of shootings happen all the time. It's not uncommon to have an unarmed individual shot if they're acting in an aggressive manner. When law enforcement deems that there's a threat, an imminent threat of loss of life or serious bodily injury, they can react to eliminate that threat. So that's a whole nother argument. But as soon as that happened, you know, they didn't cover the body up for about 20 minutes. Then you go into the responses
after Michael Brown was shot.
He's laying there. I mean, there's video. That's where the video came from of having witnesses talk about it in the background or about how it may have happened. They're trying to get some clues from these different phone tapes. Some of those are like 15, 20 minutes long, and the body's laying there the whole time exposed to the public. These things have to be thought out a little bit better because that in itself can incite a riot. Having a kid that lives in a neighborhood laying dead in the middle of the street can cause problems. Then when you send out groups like SWAT who are very aggressive in nature, I think the head of the state troopers in Missouri came out and handled it quite well. And I think that they kind of set the standard in that sometimes in law enforcement you have to back up instead of pushing forward. And I can't blame the officers. I think the officers, in my mind, quite often are very heroic in what they do. I mean, they charge into battle every day. But if you don't have standards to basically work a police dog, or let's talk about a police dog. If you don't have a leash and you don't have something to control and train that dog, the dog's going to bite anybody that comes close to it. It's the same thing with law enforcement. They have to go into battle every day. You have to have standards that say, hey, whoa, throttle back right here. And there's none. Because that's clearly evident in this group that if there's a group of people that protest and they amp it up, the police are going to amp it up. And they're going to amp it up, and they're going to, instead of, hey, let's throttle it back a little bit. Maybe we do some arrests, but then we talk to the crowd and get them, whatever works. But you have to think that out before the incident.
Is there an increasing mentality, do you think? Because all over the country we see this happening. So Ferguson, it blows up there. But what was happening in Ferguson, as you pointed out, happens all the time.
Right.
I mean, these kinds of shootings take place, officer-involved shootings take place on a regular basis. In fact, just since Michael Brown was killed, there have been a number of cases where police officers in different parts of the country have shot teenagers and killed them. Is there an increased mentality in terms of officers using deadly force? Do you feel like that needs to be dealt with? Because we do see a number of people who have been killed this way. We see, severity in terms of tasing, in terms of the way suspects are taken down, or when they're in a holding cell, thrown against the wall. Or is it just that everyone has a camera in their pocket, and so we're just seeing it more?
Well, I think it's a combination of three things. The camera, of course, we're seeing it more. Officers are being pushed, not just reacting. Officers are being pushed more, and because that's the problem when you expose certain things. So you can take that video and you can manipulate it. And I'm not defending every officer shooting. I'm not defending every officer beating somebody down. But I can tell you from personal experience, being in the FBI on surveillance before, having people approach my vehicle in a very threatening manner, and I make it known that I'm armed, and they literally step towards the vehicle and say, "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" Now, when you have to either leave that area or call for backup. So
either push forward or push back. Exactly.
And certain cases you have no choice but to push forward. And I think that's the problem here, is that law enforcement is becoming more visible, and also the challenge that law enforcement faces every day is becoming more visible. Policemen are not perfect. They're going to make mistakes, but the reality is their job is set up for making mistakes literally on an hourly basis. So you have to
define that for me. What does that mean?
Well, every situation is different. Every situation is either 100% adrenaline or no adrenaline. There's no real in between with law enforcement, because the reality is anything can change at a moment's notice, and it's proven. Things like where, you know, people get angry because somebody was shot, they had a knife and they were 20 feet away and they started charging, they shoot them. They said, well, you know, why didn't you shoot him in the leg or something? But it's proven 21 feet, that guy can get to you and disarm you before you can draw your weapon. And a knife is more deadly than a gunshot, believe it or not. So
we're short on time. Let me ask you this. My final question. In terms of the cinema that goes into TV these days, you got guys who are going into police academies, they watch all these cop shows, it's all adrenaline, it's all rush all the time. Does that play into it? Is there a misnomer for guys who are coming out of police academies?
That's typically washed out in a police academy. I mean, police academies are the closest thing a civilian get to going in the military, and they pretty much police that within the academy. I think the real problem is that there are so many emboldened people that will walk right up to police that you're starting to see these confrontations a lot more.
Yeah, I do want to ask you very quickly, Iraq. I have heard that these programs to give equipment to these different police departments has stopped because we're sending it over to Iraq. Very quickly, is that true? Have you heard?
I haven't heard, but I think, again, it's not bad for the police to have this equipment. If it's extra equipment, it's going to be left over there. I'd rather see them have it than ISIS.
Well, good point. Good to have you on. Thanks so much. Up next, the best of Give Me 5.